really does give me such pleasure to welcome you all to the Pell Center. I was speaking with the ambassador just a moment ago, and he said how wonderful it would be to be addressing 2 generations. I said, no, Ambassador, I think it's probably 3 generations that, that you will be addressing tonight. Many of you have been at lectures here at the Pell Center, and you know our vision and our philosophy of this wonderful center. As I was driving over tonight, I was thinking of a French expression, which is tout comprendre, c'est tout pardonner. To understand all is to forgive all. We're not really talking about forgiveness in this sense, but I think in the spirit of Senator Pell, to understand all is to build a foundation for peace, and that foundation is built on dialogue. It's built on talking with each other, understanding and standing in the place of the other. This is what the Pell Center stands for, and I commend all of you for coming to understand more, because that is what we are about tonight. So I look forward to our lecture tonight and to the discussion, the question and answer that will probe more deeply into a culture that we understand a little, or maybe somewhat, or a lot, but we will understand more, I feel certain, when this lecture is finished. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Raymond, who will be introducing our speaker. Chad?
Welcome. Ambassador Donald Gregg has had a long and distinguished career with the U.S. government, following military service with the U.S. Army and an undergraduate education at Williams College. He joined the Central Intelligence Agency in 1951 and was posted to Japan, Burma, Vietnam, and Korea. In 1979, Ambassador Gregg was seconded from the CIA to the National Security Council of the White House, where he was given oversight of intelligence activities and Asian policy affairs. In 1982, he retired from the CIA to become Vice President George Bush's National Security Advisor. And following George Bush's election to the presidency, was appointed the U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Korea, where he helped transform the relationship between the U.S. and the Republic from a military alliance to a much broader economic and political partnership. His service in the position was so exceptional that he became the basis for the fictional character of Ambassador Gregory Donald in the 1995 novel Op Center. In 1993, Ambassador Gregg retired after 43 years of government service to become the president and chairman of the Korea Society, a private, nonprofit, and nonpartisan organization dedicated to promoting greater awareness, understanding, and cooperation between the people of the United States and Korea. Under his leadership, the Korea Society's endowment increased from $200,000 to $15 million. Ambassador Gregg, I think we have a job here for you if you want. In 2009, Ambassador Gregg retired from the Korea Society and was made as chairman emeritus in recognition of his outstanding service. He has been the recipient of numerous awards and accolades, one of the most recent being an honorary Doctor of Law degree awarded to him by Colorado College in 2010. Please welcome Ambassador Donald P. Gregg.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and I am glad to be speaking to a group where more than one generation is represented. This is a very happy occasion for me. My son-in-law, Ned Corcoran, is here with his parents, who are longtime residents of Newport. I can't help thinking of your uncle and your brother, Jack, who was a Maryknoll missionary in Korea for years. Our paths crossed briefly there, and he just continued his service in the fall, where he passed away last year. But it's great to have all of you here. I also owe a lot to Senator Pell, and I'm very glad to be here, as maybe just a little bit of payback. I was a Republican in those days. I no longer am. I was put up for ambassador to Korea, and there's something called the Iran-Contra scandal brewing about, and the Democrats tried to sort of discredit me as a way of trying to discredit President Bush. And I had to wait about 9 months for a hearing. And before the hearing, before Senator Pell's committee, I met with him briefly, but in the end, he supported my nomination, and his decision to do that was really very pivotal. I was voted positively out of the committee, and that was very helpful to me in my hearing. So I have huge respect for him as a senator, and I'm very glad to be here in this wonderful place named for him. My introduction mentioned a book called Op Center, and Chad was too polite to say that that's a book written by Tom Clancy. And it first came up during my first visit to North Korea in April of 2002. And I had written a letter to Kim Jong-il saying that we really needed to talk with the North Koreans because they were in the bomb building business, and we had just been hit by people who would love to get their hands on nuclear related technology. And in my letter I said we need to talk so that that does not happen. And so I was invited to go to North Korea, which was very flexible of them because they had dropped leaflets denouncing me when I was ambassador to South Korea, because they knew that I had been chasing them around futilely as a CIA officer for a number of years. I still refer to North Korea as probably the longest running failure in the history of American espionage. We just do not know what is in their minds. We can look down on them from satellites and listen to them through signals intelligence, but we really don't know what they're thinking. So I met the chief nuclear negotiator of North Korea, and he started out by asking me 3 questions, all of which I thought were very interesting. The first was, why is George W. Bush so different from his father? I said, well, there are different regions in the United States. Father Bush grew up in New England, and the son grew up in Texas, and that puts a different stamp on people. Then he said, how do you function as a country when you elect people who don't have anything in common with their predecessors? And I said, well, that's the way democracy works. You might have what could be euphemistically called continuity of leadership, so you don't have that problem. But we get fed up with the president, and so we vote him out. And somebody else comes in who's very different. And the question came out of the fact that in a 14-month period, North Korea had changed from a country that had invited Bill Clinton to visit, had a long visit from Madeleine Albright to check it out. Clinton wasn't able to go because time ran out. They thought that positive line of thinking would continue, but it did not. And in January of 2002, they were named part of the Axis of Evil by George W. Bush. So then the third question was, why don't you understand us better? And I said, well, you're a very hard intelligence target, and I can tell you that I speak from experience because we've been chasing you around for a long time. We could recruit Soviets and we could recruit Chinese as agents, but we couldn't recruit North Koreans. I can sort of see them swelling with pride as I said this. And so I said, it's really, you're a very, very difficult country for us to understand. And if I had been able to do a better job as an intelligence officer earlier on, maybe we'd have better relations. So he said, well, are you wearing your Op Center hat when you gave me this analysis? And I was quite startled by that. I said, I can't believe you're referring to that book by Tom Clancy. And he said, well, of course we are. And I said, well, I think you know us a lot better than we know you. And I said, I haven't read it, but my wife has read it, and would you like her reaction to it? He said, yes. I said, well, she wrote it, or read it, and said, she refers to it as an airport-only pocketbook. And I said she really didn't mind that I died a heroic death at the end of the book, but she was furious about the fact that I'd had a Korean mistress. And they all laughed at that. So I mean, that's the story of, I don't know how you picked that bit of trivia up, but that's the full story of Op Center and me. The title, Good News and Bad News from the Koreas, derives from the fact that President Obama, in his State of the Union speech this year, mentioned South Korea either 5 or 6 times in his speech. It was quite extraordinary. I was up at Williams where I made a talk, and we sat around to listen to the speech after I was finished, so I was listening quite carefully, and there were just constant references to South Korea in terms of the quality of its education, in terms of its economic development, in terms of its quick economic recovery, in terms of the fact that its public teachers are given high reverence. And a couple of days later, David E. Sanger in the New York Times spoke of South Korea as as the United States' #1 ally in Asia. And that pleases me because I think that South Korea has really deserved that title for some time, but it has always been in the shadow of Japan. I was involved in the Vietnam War, a misbegotten effort, if there ever was one, for 4 years. And the South Koreans sent 312,000 troops to help us. That's 2 divisions for 10 years. And they did a very, very good job. I think the 2 provinces in which they were in charge were more thoroughly pacified than anything we had the same responsibility for. In Desert Storm, 1991, when the first attack on Iraq was launched in response to their invasion of Kuwait, the South Koreans were first to offer aircraft to help us lift troops over to the Middle East. They gave us about $500 million to help pay for the war, and they sent a troop unit, and they were outstanding in their support. And when we went into Iraq a second time, under George W. Bush, the South Vietnamese had the 3rd largest troop contingent there, behind the Americans and the Brits. They got very little thanks for that from George W. Bush, why I don't know, but it was very, very forthcoming of them. You were kind enough to mention sort of the theme of my time as ambassador when I was trying to change it from a military alliance to an economic and political partnership. And my hope was that South Korea might eventually become, for us in Asia, what the United Kingdom has been for us for some time in Europe. And that is a country that we really could rely on, a country with which we could have a very good dialogue on tough subjects, and a country where the relationship would grow stronger and stronger as time went on. There are obstacles to that. The South Koreans are quite passionate about beef imports. And a month after Meg and I arrived there as ambassadors, 6 college students came over the wall of our residence, broke into the residence and tried to set fire to it. They were very much against an increase of beef quotas into Korea. I've had people come after me with malice aforethought. These kids, I think were amazed at how easy it was to get into the house. It would be sort of like breaking into this beautiful house. An awful lot of big windows that are easy to smash. And so I called up the Blue House, the presidential mansion, and said, don't be too tough on these kids. And in a funny way, 4 of them have now apologized to me. 2 of them are quite prominent members of the National Assembly. And on one of my more recent trips to South Korea, made a public apology to me in front of cameras. And 2 of the other guys sent words of apology. One runs an Italian restaurant, and the other imports stuff from France. So the Koreans are passionate people. I spent 10 years in Japan. I speak Japanese, but I much prefer the Koreans because they're much more direct and you know exactly where you stand with them, whereas in Japan it's always a question of not being quite sure where they turn out. But we have the economic relationship is coming along very well. The Korean products are amazingly good. And I had a wonderful demonstration of that last year when I was invited down to the opening of a Kia factory in West Point, Georgia. And West Point is out on the western edge of Georgia, quite near Fort Benning. And in 1951, I had gone through jump school at Fort Benning. I was with CIA at that point. We didn't have our own training installation, and I went down under alias and went through parachute training under alias, so my name doesn't exist on the hallowed records of the jump school, but I was there. And there was a place across the Chattahoochee River called Phoenix City where we would retire to have a beer after going through jump training, and there was a comedian at a kind of a raunchy bar who ended his act every night by saying, there are 3 dread diseases you don't want to catch: syphilis, gonorrhea, and gone to Korea. And most of his audience were GIs heading for Korea, and it was something that you took very seriously. So that was the first time I had been down to that part of Georgia last year when I went to the opening of the Kia plant. And the night before, at a dinner in Atlanta, the governor of Georgia showed up at a dinner and got up on his hind legs and said to the chairman of the Hyundai Kia company, Mr. Chung, he said, your decision to put your plant in West Point is just galvanizing the economy in the entire region of that state, and your decision is the largest single economic development plan that has ever been instigated in the state of Georgia. So from a disease you don't want to catch in 1951 to 2010, that's quite a transformation from Korea, and I'm all for it. So we've got a very good relationship with Korea, but Korea, like the United States, elects presidents of very widely differing philosophies and schemes of approach. And Lee Myung-bak, the current president, is a hardliner. He's a businessman, and he has reversed 10 years of the Sunshine Policy, which was started by President Kim Dae-jung, with whom I was very close. I had helped keep him alive on 2 occasions, and we had a very good friendship. He was a devout Catholic, and he believed that the way to open things up with North Korea was to talk to them. And so under his regime, the first summit meeting was held between North and South Korea on the 25th of June, 2000. And it was a major step in the right direction. And it was in the spirit flowing from that, that despite some missile issues, the North Koreans had extended an invitation to Bill Clinton to visit Pyongyang, but that didn't come true. But Kim Dae-jung and his successor, Roh Moo-hyun, were devoted to trying to establish a better dialogue with North Korea. This was opposed by old members of the older generation in South Korea who remembered the horrors of the Korean War, still remembered the atrocities committed by the North Koreans, and were not ready to extend the hand of trust. And North Korea did not take full advantage of the opening that the friendship with Kim Dae-jung offered them. So not as much came of it as should have. But Lee Myung-bak's policy has reversed that 10 years. He has said that talks will not resume until the North Koreans have apologized for some of their bad behavior. It's the cold weather and the Cold War have sort of returned to Korea. So our relationship politically between South Korea and the United States is good, but the bad news is that there is no talk between North and South Korea. And President Obama, who has 6 or 7 crises which he rates on a higher scale of danger than North Korea, pays, I think, dangerously little attention to North Korea. And I say this as someone who is a very strong supporter of President Obama. And just as a little aside, I gave a talk in Colorado College last week, and I was talking about the Vietnam War, and somebody sort of didn't like my approach and said, "You seem to be talking about nothing but mistakes that we've made. And, you know, have you forgotten we've done a lot of things right?" And I said, "No, I certainly haven't." And then I quoted Lee Kuan Yew to him. Lee Kuan Yew is the Prime Minister of Singapore, a remarkable man who transformed Singapore from a tiny little island to one of the most shining economic developments in the world. He was interviewed by Charlie Rose recently. He's now 88 years old. And Rose said, "Well, why do people keep coming to you for advice?" And he said, "Well, I've had a lot of experiences, and I haven't forgotten my mistakes." And I think that's something that I feel worthy to be repeated in front of you. I haven't forgotten my mistakes. And I think that's something that we all could pay deep attention to. I certainly have tried to do that in my own life, and I think I've probably done better as a result of not having forgotten my mistakes than if I buried them in the sand somewhere. So the United States is at a very difficult period of time right now with all of the crises that are thrusting themselves forward. But I believe very much in what you said, Sister, of Senator Pell's philosophy of the need to talk. And I think that we have done that very well in dealing with South Korea. We have had some very difficult times, very difficult issues with South Korea. At one point, Jimmy Carter wanted to pull all of our troops out of South Korea. And that caused quite a confrontation. When I was ambassador, we had nuclear weapons in South Korea, and I thought we ought to get them out before we demanded that North Korea stop making nuclear weapons, and we were able to do that. So I'm very much a believer in dialogue. So shifting now to the impact of this non-talking to North Korea, how has that panned out? It hasn't panned out well. The North Koreans were very happy to see Obama elected. They had not liked George W. Bush at all. They put great faith in him and were very disappointed when he did not appoint a cabinet ranking member to sort of overseas relations with North Korea. The North Koreans are very, very hierarchical. And they they've gotten used to me over my visits over the last 9 years, and they've said, yeah, we understand you, all right, but you're not high-ranking enough. We can never solve our nuclear problems with just you. We need somebody at a higher level. And Obama couldn't get anybody of a really high level to take the job on because it's a sort of a thankless job. We're dealing with a leader who we have demonized, and that's a tendency that we have. We demonized Ho Chi Minh, whose life we had saved during the end of World War II. OSS had been jumped into North Vietnam to work with the Viet Minh who were fighting hard against the Japanese occupiers. And they were first taken to a wispy little man in a grass hut saying, please save this man. And that was Ho Chi Minh. And he was very grateful to us and wrote his constitution based on our Declaration of Independence. And we still turned against him and saw him as a cat's paw of the Chinese, ignoring 1,000 years of history of hostility between China and Vietnam. We also demonized Saddam Hussein, who deserved demonization in a way, but it caused us to think, of course he has nuclear weapons. He's a really bad guy. And of course he's helping Al-Qaeda, because we just don't like him and he doesn't like us. And so before the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the intelligence services of the UK and the United States were put under great pressure from their governments to produce proof that Saddam Hussein was building nuclear weapons and that he was helping Al-Qaeda. And there was no proof there. But the pressure was such that both services capitulated, and their rationale was, well, we know he's got the weapons, we know he's in touch with Al-Qaeda, and we'll find that out once we invade. We didn't, because he destroyed his nuclear weapons, and he wasn't in bed with Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda was very hostile to him. So we've done the same kind of thing with Kim Jong-il. He's sort of funny looking. He's a voluptuary, probably spilled more than I have drunk. And he's, not somebody that you really naturally warm up to. But he's a very smart man. Madeleine Albright had 11 hours with him. And she's very funny about it. I appeared with her at the University of Michigan one time, and she said, yeah, I had 11 very good hours with Kim Jong-il. He's very smart, I like him. We've got quite a lot in common. We're about the same height, we both wear high heels, and we both put mousse in our hair. I've also spoken to Chinese and Russians and South Koreans who have talked with Kim Jong-il, and they say he is very smart, and he has built nuclear weapons as a way of assuring that the United States does not attack North Korea. And the North Koreans have said that to me. They said, we keep track of the people you go after, and you don't attack anybody with a nuclear weapons capacity. And they are already saying Gaddafi made a real mistake in giving his nuclear weapons up, which he did in 2003. You never would have gone in there and intervened if he still had them, and that's probably true. So the fact that we're not talking to the North Koreans, the fact that we weren't able to get a high-level representative. We got one of my successors, Steve Bosworth, who's a terrific guy, but he's also dean of the Fletcher School at Tufts. And he does that half-time, and he's only in Washington when Washington calls him. I worked in the White House for 10 years. And people fight to get at the president and give him their concerns and their ideas. And if there's nobody there representing North Korea, nobody's going to get that kind of message to the vice president, to the president, or the vice president. So North Korea is way down on the list of priorities, and we're leaving it primarily to the South Koreans to set the pace. And they have taken a very tough line. And there have been 2 incidents which have contributed to that. A year ago in March, a South Korean ship was sunk, or blew up and sank. And the South Koreans have accused the North Koreans of doing it. We have sided with that. We have signed off on that. I have doubts about that. I'm an old intelligence officer probably before anything else. I think there would have been no logical reason for the North Koreans to have done that, and I don't think they have the technical capacity of doing it. The Russians agree with me, and the Chinese agree with me, and the Japanese don't think they have the technical capabilities of doing it. I wish there was somebody from the National War or the Naval War College here. Is there anybody? We could have a very good spirited discussion on that. And then later on, last December, the North Koreans shelled a South Korean island after a extended live fire exercise by the South Koreans and killed 2 civilians. And this went on on television, so the South Koreans saw it, and that has created a tremendous feeling of animus for the North Koreans on the part of the South. And in the meantime, 2 things have happened. Chinese influence has increased markedly. The Chinese are much more worried about an implosion or an explosion in North Korea than they are about North Korea having a few nuclear weapons, which they will never use. And so the Chinese have told me that we will do our best to see that North Korea neither implodes nor explodes. And if in the end North and South Korea is united, we will be content with that as long as you North Americans don't put your troops closer to our border. So Chinese influence grows. The second thing that has happened is that the coldest winter since 1945 in North Korea. And there's a terrible phrase in Korean. In Korean, it's pori koge. It means spring hunger. And South Korea used to face it, and it means a time starting about now, where you've eaten everything that you planted in the fall, and now you're just waiting for things you planted in the spring to come up. And I've talked with 2 Americans who were in North Korea in February. They work for charitable organizations with a long history of giving food to the North. They have been in unheated hospitals where newborn children lie with little hope of survival. They have been to villages along the Chinese border where people are already eating grass. And there's a desperate need for food in the North, and the South is not giving any. And they are saying it's always diverted to the army. It's not given to the women and the children who need it. The people who give it say that's not true, that they have good monitoring. And the United States is sort of taking its cue from the South Koreans. I think Secretary Clinton is in South Korea, or has been, and I hope she's been talking about that. Because in the article that I've sent to you, Chad, I make a case as strongly as I can for sending food. I hope we will. Another very interesting development is taking place in South Korea. Jimmy Carter is part of a group called the Elders. It was started by Nelson Mandela with Carter's help. And Jimmy Carter, who has been to North Korea 2 or 3 times with great impact, is going to go first to Beijing and then to Pyongyang, and he will be accompanied by Gro Harlem Brundtland, a woman, an MD, a former Prime Minister of Norway, whom I have met. She's a former head of the World Health Organization. So she will be taking a hard look at the health issue. He's also accompanied by Mary Robinson, the former President of Ireland, who was the head of the UNHCR, the UN High Commission on Refugees. And the third person is Martti Ahtisaari, the former President of Finland, who has a crisis management program, which has been very helpful in settling some problems in the Balkans. So this is the highest ranking foreign group that will ever have been to North Korea. The Obama administration is totally ignoring it, as is the South Korean government. The Chinese and the North Koreans are very interested, and I will be very interested to see what comes out of that visit. They have been in touch with me, asking for some suggestions that I might have. I made one suggestion a year and a half ago to our Vice President, suggesting that Kim Jong-un, the son of Kim Jong-il, the designated successor, that he be invited to the United States for an orientation tour. And I did this a year and a half ago before he's been designated. Nothing was done about it because of the fear of retribution from the Republicans. So I've suggested to the elders that they invite him to visit Northern Europe. They've got the former chiefs of state of Ireland, Finland, and Norway, and he's been partly educated in Switzerland, and it would be a good chance to learn something about him, and it would be a very good chance for him to learn something about modern Europe. So I'm very hopeful that something can come out of that visit. There's an interesting book by a man named Basevich, who's teaching at Boston University. It's called The Limits of Power and the End of American Exceptionalism. And this is one of the choices we need to make about how we're going to comport ourselves in the world. And he quotes Reinhold Niebuhr as saying that instead of pushing for externally promoted regime change, we should do what Niebuhr suggests in his book, The State of Nations, and that is look for the point of concurrence between two contesting states. That's what Kim Dae-jung did. I think that's what Senator Pell advocated. And it's that kind of thing that I think needs to be done in dealing with North Korea. We have a bad record in terms of pushing for regime change by an exercise of our power. When I was in CIA, the Dulles brothers were in a very high profile. They had a list of 8 countries where they were going to bring about regime change, and they got through 3. First was Iran, 1953, which was judged to be a very fine success. We're still paying for it today. Second was Guatemala, where we put a bloody-minded general on the throne. Third was Cuba, which failed at the time and brought the most dangerous moment in world history, the Cuban Missile Crisis, as its aftermath. I think they tore up their list. Contrast that with Nixon, whom I didn't like as a man, his opening to China, and see how China is gradually economically booming and gradually moving to extricate itself from the pit into which it had fallen under the rule of Mao Zedong. I think North Korea is doing very bad things to its people. I make no excuse for that. People say, well, why are you defending them? And I say, I'm not really defending them. I'm explaining how we can change them without fighting them. And the way to do that, I believe, is through dialogue, through drawing them out of their isolation, making them more a part of the family, the nation, so that they will see that it is in their own interest to change, just as China has seen. So that's the good news and the bad news. We've got a great relationship with South Korea, but they've got a president whom I'm not too hot for, who's going out of office about the same time that Obama is up for re-election. And I think that things will change about that time. And I hope that before that time, we will have decided to give food aid to keep people alive, and that perhaps the elders will have gotten the ball rolling on the start of some kind of dialogue. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope I provoked some questions. Thank you.